Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com, a proud affiliate of the Hockey News. I'm your host, Nick Brlansky, joined as always by Nick Horwat after a brief hiatus last week because, well, I was stuck on 70 in traffic and we really didn't have any time to record on Thursday. But fortunately, Horwat did not bite my head off, so we are back for a new episode here on a Tuesday in the middle of July, which means there's not very much to talk about surrounding the Pittsburgh Penguins. But you know what we haven't done in a while, Horwat? We've kind of steered clear of it a little bit. Let's just talk about Erik Karlsson. I mean, obviously, there's no real news on the Erik Karlsson front. I've seen a bunch of people say that, hey, the Penguins and the Hurricanes, here's the news. They are the final two teams, and they have been for the past week and a half. They were last Tuesday when I think I made the same joke. So I'm Nick Brlansky. That's Nick Horwat. We're talking Erik Karlsson. Horwat, it's been a little bit of a time coming because we've just kind of avoided it a little bit, waiting for news that just hasn't come.
Yeah, and sometimes you just have to wait things out just to see the full result, and then you're able to discuss it, dissect it, and give genuine reactions to things. Whereas, I mean, this is much like the GM search. It's all kind of not hit a standstill, but slowed to a walking pace, and things are not. I don't want to say not close to the finish line, but there's a lot of it's a lot of a poker game. I forget who. I think it was Elliot Friedman referred to it as a poker game. Everyone's just kind of waiting for the first person to fold, or to up the ante and do whatever they need to do. It's just the waiting game. The Penguins and the Hurricanes are reportedly the last two teams in there, unless you're Frank Saravalli, then you believe there are more. Frank Saravalli doesn't seem to ever want the Penguins to have anything nice, but that's just from what I have seen from him in recent memory. But regardless, the Penguins are in. Apparently, Karlsson would prefer the Penguins, which is kind of that's not a huge push, but that's something. That's not nothing. And it's just going to come down to whose price tag fits the best among these three teams.
Yeah, you mentioned it perfectly early on there. You said the Penguins GM search really kind of stopped for Kyle Dubas. Penguins offseason has stopped once again, this time for Erik Karlsson. But it's an interesting thing when looking at this deal because you look at a player that is a three-time Norris Trophy winner, most recently this past season, scored over 100 points on, yes, a bad San Jose Sharks team, so he was able to freewheel because they really didn't care that much about playing defense because they knew they weren't going to win anything. But you look at this deal, and the one thing that I mentioned and I put out a Penguins to go about it is you have to tread carefully because you don't want to overpay. You don't want to get into a bidding war because the Pittsburgh Penguins don't have the assets to be in a bidding war. That's the one thing that, at least the way it feels as of right now, is it's not becoming that. It feels like the Sharks are waiting for something like that, but both the Penguins and the Carolina Hurricanes are content to sit back and say, we're not driving the price up for each other because at the end of the day, Erik Karlsson is 33 years old. He does have an $11.5 million cap hit, which, yes, there's going to be salary retention, but that's all built into the deal. So why are they going to build up a bidding war between two teams when the player is not worth all these astronomical packages that I've seen out there? So I kind of like the fact that both the Penguins and the Hurricanes are standing their ground and saying, listen, we're not getting into a bidding war. And it seems as if it's at a standstill right now, which means Dubas and Don Waddell are both looking at this and saying, listen, we would love to have Erik Karlsson, and we'll talk about where he could fit on the Pittsburgh Penguins here in a minute. But at the end of the day, this deal needs to make sense. Like, you were not trading for 23-year-old Erik Karlsson before he got stepped on by Matt Cook and his Achilles. Like, you're trading for 33-year-old Erik Karlsson with a monster contract. So I'm glad that as of now, it seems like there's not actually a bidding war as much as just the San Jose Sharks trying to figure out which deal is best and getting as much as possible, even though teams aren't jumping head over tails back and forth between each other.
And that's perfectly fine because, like you mentioned, it is Erik Karlsson. It is 33-year-old Erik Karlsson who makes $11.5 million against the cap annually. Throw in there the injury history. That Achilles thing is still beating him up. I mean, he can't turn whichever way it is. I forget. He can't pivot.
Left.
Yeah, whichever way it is. He can't
Whatever way.
pivot. Also, what that also does is that affects the way he plays his own position. He scored 102 points on the San Jose Sharks. That's all well and dandy. That's actually phenomenal. Only 5 players have ever done that 15 times in history. Um, and now he's one of them. But he also isn't phenomenal at playing defense as a defenseman. I mean, maybe people are, not looking at his defensive acumen the right way because he plays with the Sharks. And, they weren't super worried about playing defense. Clearly, you saw this defenseman put up 100 points, but you still have to be able to play defense, right? That's just what you have to do. And he can't demand that much of a return because of the injury history, age, and price tag, and also that the whole point of his position. Now he helps out in so many different ways that it's kind of a moot point, but
Mhm.
it's still something to take into account here because assuming the Penguins get this deal done, Jeff Petrie has to be going the other way. I mean,
Yeah.
not that Jeff Petrie had a phenomenal season. He definitely has had better. At least we know he can play defense better than Erik Karlsson, right? Defense, not
Yes.
game of hockey, but defense.
Yes. Yes. He is a better defender than Erik Karlsson, but like you mentioned, Erik Karlsson is not a complete and utter sieve on defense. He's
Correct.
just not what he used to be, and he's not what you would consider a defensive defenseman. But again, so too is Chris Letang, right?
Mhm.
And let's not be mistaken here. The price tag is going to be hefty for Erik Karlsson, whoever lands him, whether that's Carolina, whether that's Pittsburgh, whether this draws into the regular season and another team gets involved because they get an injury or something happens. The price tag is going to be hefty. But the point needs to stand that the price tag can't keep going up. And it seems as if that's where the Pittsburgh Penguins and Carolina Hurricanes are currently sitting, while the Sharks are just not happy with where the price tag is for both teams. So that's a little dissection of where the deal is at as of right now. But let's also talk a little bit about hypotheticals because we've been doing that a lot in July because that's really what it is. It's silly season. A lot of the news has died down. You talk about hypotheticals, you talk about what could happen in the season. So if the Pittsburgh Penguins pull this off, or what, where would Erik Karlsson play when he came to the 4-1-2?
So your immediate reaction, everyone's immediate reaction to this would have to be second line behind Eric or behind Crystal Tang, pretty much essentially flipping out Jeff Petrie for Erik Karlsson. He's going to play that second line right side. He's going to play the second power play unit. The more you think about it, though, and the more you look at it, and I think Josh Yohe put it in his most recent piece. Chris Letang is perfectly fine of surrendering his quarterbacking duties on the first power play unit. At this age, he's played 1,000 games. He's won 3 cups. He just wants to win more cups. That's all it's come down to. So I don't know if Erik Karlsson plays on the first line necessarily. He might. With I would still stick with Pedersen, I think. It's an underrated thing that they're both from Sweden and they could probably make great magic together. But it's that power play unit, and that's a big part of Erik Karlsson's game. I think Chris Letang would be perfectly okay with surrendering that spot, and giving Karlsson at least the first power play unit, first of all. And let's just say things go downhill and very weird. Hey, you got 2 great defensive options on your first power play unit. Um, there's a lot of intrigue that could go in. I would say he ends up probably getting second line just because this team he gets the second line with Pedersen. Probably go Letang, Graves on 1, and then first power play unit quarterback duties.
Mhm.
That'd be my decision at least.
Yeah, and it's weird because, I've seen some discourse about,
Mhm.
first pairing, second pairing. Does Carlson go over Letang in the lineup? Doesn't really make a difference at 5-on-5. It really doesn't because at the end of the day, you look at ice time as who's your first pairing, second pairing, and I feel like when you have whether it's Graves Letang, Graves Carlson, or Pedersen Letang, Pedersen Carlson, no matter what the conglomeration of those 4 are, it's probably going to be pretty even when it comes to 5-on-5 ice time. And it's going to be obviously a case by case, night by night basis because some nights You might play penalty kill, or you might be on the penalty kill much more than you're on the power play. And let's face it, Erik Karlsson's not going to play very much, if any, penalty kill. And
No.
Letang might. So then Letang probably gets more ice time that night. You might play power play more, and maybe Karlsson gets more power play ice time. Like that, special teams is where there's going to be a difference and where there's an actual discussion to be had. But 5-on-5, if the Penguins post that graphic at the beginning of the night and it says Graves Letang is the number one unit, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to play the most ice time and be deployed in that game as the number one unit. So I'm not all concerned about that. I think that personally, I agree with you that Pettersson and Karlsson would be a much better duo when it comes to who to match up with who. But the power play becomes interesting. Obviously, there was that piece you mentioned by Yoey that, Letang, he just wants to win. He can give up that. I wouldn't hate seeing both of them on the ice, right? The Penguins have had a revolving door on the left half wall since Phil Kessel left. I mean, we've seen it filled by some pretty successful players, or by players that have succeeded in that role, I should say. Jared McCann was really good in 2019 in that role. Evan Rodriguez excelled in that role at the beginning of the season where he went off for the Pittsburgh Penguins. But we've also seen Brian Rust not really fit the mold there, despite still being a very talented goal scorer. We've seen Ricard Raquel. Yes, it kind of worked, but not to the level that it did with the names that I mentioned prior. Maybe you put a guy like Erik Karlsson there because he does have just elite ability when it comes to vision on the ice, when it comes to passing on the ice. He is an elite playmaker, and putting him and Letang out there, is it too many cooks in the kitchen, or is it just what the Pittsburgh Penguins need? I like that idea, at least to see what happens, because you can't leave that stone unturned. Like that power play would be ridiculous if you have Crosby, Malkin, Gensel, Letang, and Karlsson. That's just unfair, just flat out. But I do wonder if they decide to go with the one quarterback power play system. I know that people have mentioned that Jeff Petrie did take over at times for Chris Letang last year. I wonder what that would look like if Karlsson came in and became the quarterback right away, because then it's okay. Yeah, maybe we need to see it, but I don't know. I'm not sure. It doesn't strike me that Letang would be somebody that's protective over that spot. But hockey players are competitive, man. And you never know how that's going to work out when you introduce a new element into it.
Yeah, they're going to be competitive. But like I mentioned, it's what does Letang have left to play for at this point? It's just winning more. And whatever it takes, he'll likely be the true leader that he is and take the step back and understand what needs to happen for the right teams to win and for the right pieces to go in the right spots. And it could sound like too many cooks in the kitchen. I mean, there is only one puck to go around. But what this does is suddenly it makes your if you're just doing Karlsson on the back end of power play 1 and you're putting Letang on 2, that makes 2 much more of a threat too. That makes the second unit. Yeah. I mean, they get 45 seconds usually,
if that.
Yeah, but that makes them also a viable threat. You have Karlsson back there. I would assume if you're not doing both of them on the first, Raquel's on the first. So who's on the second? We already have Letang on the back end. We'll get into the center discussion because that is iffy.
Yeah.
But you got Brian Rust down there. I'm suddenly forgetting every single player on this team just because, off season. But you have Brian Rust down there. Riley Smith is a newcomer that has offensive ability. Maybe Alex Nylander sees some time because he is a very good offensive-minded player. You have the options. You can easily throw names out there on the second unit and make that a threatening line. But if you do both Karlsson and Letang on power play 1, on power play 2, you mean don't underestimate what P.O. Joseph can do on that unit. Maybe Ty Smith is in the lineup, and maybe he's quarterbacking that unit with names I had already mentioned. So there's options here. It's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. Yeah, there's only one puck to go around. Yeah, but they're all viable answers. They're all answers that I go, yes, that looks good to me.
Yeah, and I think the big thing with the Pittsburgh Penguins too that when that happens, a lot of the time the Penguins power play, especially last season, they would fail to score, they would lose momentum, and then all of their talented offensive players were just on the ice for 2 minutes.
Mhm.
Maybe in this scenario, you can go on the power play, even if your power play does not look good with Erik Karlsson as number 1 and Chris Letang sitting on the bench. You can ride out your number 1 defense pairing with 2 minutes of rest to continue that momentum with Letang and Graves. I mean,
Yep.
there's a lot of options there. There's a lot to dissect, and of course, we'll dissect more of it if the Penguins are able to go out and land Erik Karlsson. But for the meantime, I mean, it would be interesting to see how Chris Letang would react to that, because he has been the undoubted, unquestioned, unchallenged number 1 really since Sergei Gonchar left. There were, a couple of years there where Justin Schultz was really good on the right side for the Pittsburgh Penguins, but when Chris Letang was healthy, there was no question who the number 1 defenseman on the right side was. It was still Chris Letang. Even if Schultz had outperformed him, especially offensively in the 2016, was it? I know 2017 Schultz, because Letang was out. Schultz was really good for the Penguins, but it does get interesting if Karlsson is introduced, and how immediate that transition would happen and where players would be placed. But we do want to talk really quickly about who the Penguins could target if they don't land Erik Karlsson in the next couple of weeks. Horwat, what are some names that you would look at, and what do you think would have to happen for them to be able to bring in some of these names?
Yeah, so first of all, the real big caveat here is everyone waiting for that second buyout window to open up to make things easier on the salary cap situation for the Penguins. The only downside of that is we have to wait the longest. They scheduled Drew O'Connor's hearing for August 4th, which is not early in that
No.
situation. That is the last possible day.
Yeah.
So, if the Hurricanes are real serious about the deal, they'd be smart to get it done sooner rather than wait until the Penguins have that opportunity. That being said, who are some other options? I keep falling to Matt Dumba because he's still an option that is out there somehow, some way. He's a great right-hand shot defenseman. I don't know if he brings the same sort of offensive acumen that
not
Erik
quite.
Karlsson brings, but he seems like he would be the first go-to if you miss out on a guy like Erik Karlsson. He's got some youth left in him. He's definitely a name that knows what to do in the NHL. And it's interesting that he hasn't signed already. He's coming off of a deal that earned him $6 million. But I mean, I doubt he can hit that again just for sake of price tag. I don't know exactly what would need to clear out for the Penguins to do something like this.
Yeah.
Jeff Petrie, obviously. Maybe a Granlund buyout helps. But I would say he's the first option, but that's something that you would have to know quickly if Karlsson's not landing here. You would have to know that pretty quickly, because Matt Dumba is a guy that could get scooped up at any second.
Yeah, obviously there's issues with the salary cap in Minnesota that are preventing them from bringing him back. Named Ryan Suter and Zach Parise still haunting the halls up there at XL Energy Center. But Matt Dumba, to me, obviously would love to see the Penguins have him at right-hand D2 over Jeff Petrie. Just a better option in general. But like you mentioned, the Penguins don't have the cap space now. And if they don't go through with the Karlsson trade, which, there's a chance that it doesn't happen. As of right now, probably 50-50, even though Karlsson would prefer to come to the Penguins. Nobody really knows.
Right.
But Matt Dumba, while it would be a great option for the Pittsburgh Penguins, there's a lot that has to go right. Even if you get, Mikael Granlund's contract off the books, that's $4 million. Is Dumba really going to take a $2 million pay cut at the age of 28 when he's potentially looking for his last big payday? Is it something where we've seen it happen multiple times this offseason already? He signs a 1-year deal because, hey, the salary cap is supposed to jump next season, play somewhere that has a good team in the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's a team that's, as of right now, middle of the ground, potentially a playoff team. Goes there, has a good season, high visibility on the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's another thing that, we don't talk about a lot. The Penguins are on the national stage a good bit. If
Yeah.
you want to make money, you perform in Pittsburgh, you're going to make money because there's high visibility with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So maybe that's something where he says, hey, I'll take a 1-year deal. I'll take a little bit less money, but the Penguins are still going to have to create more than, I think, the Granlund buyout, if that's the only way that they can do it. And you mentioned it. Jeff Petrie probably has to go for any of these names that we mentioned to become a Pittsburgh Penguin. A name that I look at is somebody that just hit the market, and that's Anthony DeAngelo. Would certainly get interesting in the Metropolitan Division. He's already played for the Rangers, the Hurricanes, and most recently the Philadelphia Flyers. He was actually forced to play a little bit more defense in Philly last season. His numbers dropped a bit because of that. I mean, because if you look at the previous couple seasons beforehand, he had, I think 1 year he had 68% or 65% offensive zone start percentage. Last year, that dropped to just over 50%. So he was forced to play more defense because he was playing on a bottom of the league Philadelphia Flyers team. And yes, his numbers did drop because of that, but he's still somebody that would bring more of an offensive punch than Jeff Petrie did. He would somebody that would bring certainly headlines to the Pittsburgh Penguins on a more consistent basis. I think it would be an interesting, from a hockey standpoint and keeping it strictly hockey, it would be an interesting signing that would fill a hole if the Pittsburgh Penguins, again, would be able to get rid of Jeff Petrie in the meantime.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you too, because keeping this strictly a hockey discussion, he's a good offensive puck mover too. I mean, look at the last 2 seasons. This past year, he played 70 games with the Flyers, had 42 points, 31 of them assists. That's on the Flyers. He was a minus 27, so that really showed. But jump to the previous season. Carolina Hurricanes, great team, offensively gifted team. He had 51 points, 41 of them assists, a plus 30. The guy knows how to play hockey, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Do other things get in the way? You could say that. I think you could say that quite a bit. But, these are phenomenal numbers for a puck-moving defenseman. He had 38 assists in a season with the Rangers. He had, in his rookie season, 14 points in 39 games with the Arizona Coyotes. That's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubting his hockey skill. And this is where, in a situation like this, sure, his issues aren't going to be forgotten by many of a fan, but if he can bring offense and help your team win, I'm not saying put his issues aside, but look at what he can do to help your team. And if he is a changed man, which we don't really know yet, no one's really asked him about it. But if he's, on the right course, and if Kyle Dubas looks at him and thinks I can fix him, well, then,
Mm-hmm.
you never know. There's a lot of weird things that would go into a Tony DeAngelo signing.
Mm-hmm.
From a hockey standpoint, also a great option.
Yeah, if you want to test your, climate, and you want to test your what's the word I'm looking for here? Culture, your locker room culture. If you want to test the leadership of Crosby and Malkin, which has, been tested a couple times, then you bring in Tony DeAngelo and you say, you know what? This is not a young team. This is a team of veterans. This is a team of winners for the most part. You look at their leadership core. There's a lot of winners involved in that. And you say, listen, you come here, get your head on straight, play hockey, and that's it. Like, if you want Tony DeAngelo, the player, you're going to obviously have to deal with Tony DeAngelo, the person. But there is a level of, you mentioned, can Kyle Dubas say, oh, I can fix him? It's at the end of the day, it's not up to Kyle Dubas. That's up to Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, Sidney Crosby, Brian Rust, and the leaders in that room. So that would certainly be interesting. But for the skill and the talent wise, it is certainly somebody that, if Erik Karlsson falls through, Tony DeAngelo would not be a bad contingency plan on the ice. The only other name that I really took for anything that's remaining on the free agent market is Ethan Bear. The only unfortunate part about that is he's recovering from a shoulder surgery, might be out until November, December. Not sure on his recovery time, but he did have a decent season last year in Vancouver.
Yeah, and I like Ethan Bear as an option too. I just was able to pull up another name or two so we can get into them in a minute. But Ethan Bear is another solid young option who, coming off a shoulder surgery. But you know what the Penguins still have that can make up for waiting on Ethan Bear? We still have a surplus of defensemen at the NHL level.
Yeah.
So let's say we take an Ethan Bear signing. He's out until December. All right. Chad Ruhwedel, Mark Friedman, Ty
Yeah.
Smith. We have names that can still play at the NHL level.
Yeah.
If you need to take a flyer on an injured player for this sort of situation, go for it. I don't think that's an awful idea. And Ethan Bear is a name that I had listed as well at one point. So there's many, many names that could still work, especially in the free agent market. But the trade market's also got a couple of interesting names.
Okay.
According to Dan Kongursky of Pittsburgh Hockey Now, the Penguins have already kind of been involved with Matt Grzelcyk as a backup plan. That's a name that's out there. But one thing that kind of faded after a little while. Remember when we were reportedly in on Noah Hanifin? Now,
Yeah.
I know he plays the left side, but he hasn't been dealt yet. I mean, maybe do some other juggling. Like I just said, we have a surplus of NHL-ready defensemen.
Yeah.
Screw it. You miss out on Karlsson. Noah Hanifin's an option for the left side. Now you're really filtering things in and out. Sure, you still have to figure out Petrie. Maybe Jan Ruda is all of a sudden your second-line defender. But you make things work. You make other adjustments, and Noah Hanifin's an option. And if not him, again, still a left side guy, but also from Calgary, Nikita Zadorov, a name. There are options out there. There are options out there if you don't get Karlsson and you still want to make changes to the defensive core.
Yeah. My only thing, and listen, nothing against Noah Hanifin. Nothing against Noah Hanifin. I think the Penguins would be smart to have Noah Hanifin on the roster. When I look at the Penguins' left side, to me, why change what isn't broken? Now, I get it. Unless you need to fix the right side because the right side's broken. Take from a strength to address a weakness is not always the best course of action, but when I look at the Penguins' left side right now, Ryan Graves, Marcus Pettersson, P.O. Joseph, and then if you want to get into the depth, Ty Smith and Mark Friedman. That is a strong left side.
Yeah, it is.
I look at the right side. Chris Letang, Jeff Petrie, Jan Ruda, Chad Ruhwedel. That needs some work. Really, again, if the Penguins take part of that left side, whether that's POJ or whether that's Ty Smith and included in an Erik Karlsson deal, then your right side becomes Letang, Karlsson, Ruda, Ruhwedel, then the defense looks much better. So I don't know about adding another left shot defenseman. Hanifin would be an upgrade over Pettersson, but at the same time, who else are you shipping out in order to get that deal done? Becomes the question for me. But no, there are options for the Pittsburgh Penguins, both in the trade market, as you had mentioned, and in free agency. But again, it's a lot of wheeling and dealing. And with it already being July 18th, it feels like it's getting late in the offseason, despite it not getting late at all in the offseason, simply because most people are done by August with their roster transactions. It's going to be an interesting wave of moves here because there is a bunch of things that haven't happened yet. Remember when we were talking about, man, there's a lot of goaltenders and really good goaltenders that are on the trade market this year. Not a single one has been traded. So what is going to happen in the next 2 months leading up to training camp? Like, are all these goaltenders staying still? Is Connor Hellebuck really going to be on the Winnipeg Jets again next year? Is John Gibson really going to go back to Anaheim, even though he said he doesn't want to? Like, what is everybody waiting for this Erik Karlsson trade against all 32 teams? I don't know. It's a weird offseason. The salary cap only went up $1 million. And teams are in a weird position right now, the Penguins included. So, yes, there are other options out there to upgrade the Penguins defense. Yes, I think the Penguins defense still needs upgraded. Adding Ryan Graves was great, but potentially need to do a little bit more than that. But it is going to be an interesting offseason, and it all seems to hinge on when and if Erik Karlsson is dealt to either the Penguins or the Hurricanes.
Yeah, and I think it looks like everyone is just kind of waiting for that sweet spot where there is just no reporters, no news person working.
Everybody's on the beach.
And everyone's on the beach at the cabin, just on vacation. And here comes all of the moves that no one's going to report on or be able to report on or have to work on vacation. That'll be a ton of fun for everybody. But no, also the longer this goes on, the more I just go, all right, I think, let's just get it done and let's just screw it. Let's have fun. Send off whoever. Let's just, people are not looking. I mean, yeah, Kyle Dubas wants to build the team for the future as well. Man, we're not going to be a good team. The Penguins are not going to be a good team in the very near future. And why not just wheel and deal zero defensemen, defensive defensemen, and just play goofy hockey? Why not? If it helps you win some games, if it doesn't, I don't know. We'll get into that a little bit more in a minute, I'm sure too.
Yeah, we do have a bunch of listener questions because we didn't have a podcast on Thursday. We have a couple stocked up from then. We had a couple sent over the weekend. We will get to all 4 of those listener questions that came in over the weekend after this break. And the first one still involves Erik Karlsson. So hold on because we have more EK65 news or discussions to come. We will be right back right after this. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com, an affiliate of the Hockey News. We're going to get into our listener questions. We had a bunch and we didn't have an episode, so that's what we're going to devote the rest of this show to, and it is going to be a little bit of a longer show because we didn't have one last Thursday. Trying to make sure you get your Pittsburgh Penguins fix here on the 3rd week of July, whatever it is. I mean, the offseason just starts to blend together. But let's start by talking about a question coming in from Gunnar Murphy on Twitter. He said the reported ask for Erik Karlsson. He didn't say where the reported ask was from. So, but the reported ask that he is aware of for Erik Karlsson is 2 first-round picks, Jeff Petrie, Mikael Granlund, Pierre-Olivier Joseph, and first-round pick from last year's draft, Owen Pickering. Would you be willing to make this trade with retained salary?
All the way through it, I'm working with it. And then you hit Pickering, and that's kind of where I get some pause. But like I just mentioned, screw it. You're not going to have a good team in a couple years anyway. Why not fire away on whatever you're willing to take, especially if it includes Petrie and Granlund, as we just discussed Drew O'Connor's arbitration case opening up that second buyout window. If there's a team willing to take Granlund just straight up, absolutely. I think you kind of have to dig into your prospect pool a little bit. I know everyone's going to jump toward a Pickering or Braden Yeager's too new. He's not going anywhere. Nope. We have a year with Pickering, at least in the organization. That is the only place where I get pause on this. Because I would say if you're able to swap out a different defenseman or a different prospect in some way, then you go for it. Something about your top 3 prospects you just don't want to touch, and that includes Yeager, Pickering, and probably Sam Poulin until he can prove himself as an NHL player. But if you're able to ship out number 4, whoever that may be, whoever the organization believes that is,
Blomqvist. Yeah,
Dang.
stay away from trading goaltenders. Let's just put that as a blanket fact right there. Stay away from trading goaltender prospects because there aren't many of them.
Yeah, so maybe your top prospect skater.
Yes.
Who again, it gets weird. I mean, we have, especially the defensive side, like I mentioned, we have a ton of options in terms of players who have NHL experience. Xavier Ouellet, Taylor Fedun. I mean, Taylor Fedun's not trade worthy, but you know what I mean. Will Butcher, Mark Friedman, even. If you're able to find some takers with one of those names instead of Pickering, swing away. I'm not worried about those firsts, for sure.
The only thing that I would be worried about with the first is if you make that deal, that's your deal. Like the trade deadline, you're not bringing in anybody worth of massive substance. Like if you need to add a top 6 winger, God forbid something happens to somebody in the top 6 for the Pittsburgh Penguins, at that point, you don't really have the assets to do anything. To bring in somebody of that stature. So would I like to keep a first rounder in that aspect? Yes, I would say take out the first rounder. Because here's the thing. If that is the trade, how much retained salary are you getting? Because Petrie and Granlund already basically make up for Erik Karlsson's salary. So if you
Yeah.
retain 5 million, then the Penguins automatically there have 5 million in cap space on top of getting Erik Karlsson. So that gets very interesting, and that's why when I first looked at this, I said, "Wow, that's just it's an overpay," and it is an overpay. But considering the salary cap implications, if that is what Kyle Dubas is hoping for, like, hey, we're going to get Petrie and Granlund off the books, and we're going to have $5 million in cap space after this trade is done, that becomes interesting. But
Yeah.
then it becomes too good to be true. So at the end of the day, I also don't think San Jose would be like, yeah, we'll take on these two players with $11 million combined salary for the next 2 years, plus have $5 million for the next 4 years on retain for Erik Karlsson. So,
Mhm.
it seems too good to be true, even though it's an overpay. What it does for the Pittsburgh Penguins, maybe you make that deal if you're the Penguins. But at the end of the day, that does feel like, not trying to big brain it, does feel like a little bit of an overpay for Erik Karlsson still.
Yeah, it's it's a lot to move out, especially just for one player. I'm sure there'd be other small, unnoticeable assets that be sent back as well, just to make NHL regulations work. Um, but it's also surprising that the Sharks could be asking for something like this. I mean, can they?
I mean,
We
you
get
could see why they would be at a stalemate right now if that's the
yeah,
Sharks ask.
exactly. If that's what the Sharks are asking for, that is a lot. And I mean, Erik Karlsson has already pretty much said he doesn't want to play for your team. He's already requested his trade,
Yeah.
and that doesn't necessarily take away from what you can ask for, but it does make other teams look at you and go, "Well, we're going to offer you far less than what you're asking for." Then because he doesn't want to be there, he doesn't want to play for you. You have to, no, you don't have to, but you should uh, go by
Mhm.
his requests. So it gets interesting. This does seem like a lot, but you also figure you're able to get Petrie and Granlund off the books at once. I think it's also really interesting. We've just had this whole conversation. It didn't mention POJ,
Yeah, and that's the
but
thing, like, POJ, it's not like he's an insignificant factor, he's an NHL caliber defenseman.
we have Ty Smith to fill the hole if we need to, or vice
That's the
versa.
thing.
We have P.O. Joseph to fill a Ty Smith hole if we need to, like he already has.
Yeah,
So there's one of those two being involved. I don't see too much of an issue. If both of
mhm,
them get involved, hold on now. Let's pump the brakes.
yeah.
But
I know
I
the
doubt
Penguins
both will get involved.
Yeah, I know the Penguins have right now a stockpile of defensemen, but trading out 3 defensemen, 2 of them being younger defensemen is a wild thing to do for a 33-year-old on the right side, whereas, Petrie plays the right, POJ plays the left, and I can't remember what side Pickering plays as of right now.
I
Before
can't
we
remember
move
either.
on to the next question, if I take Pickering out of that deal and put Tristan Brose in there, do you make it immediately?
Oh, fire away.
Fire away? You don't care about
Fire
the
away.
picks. You really don't care about the picks.
I didn't care about the picks until you mentioned the trade deadline because, again, like I said, I'm just looking at the right now and
Yeah.
getting uh, a deal set in stone, getting that moving at this very moment, and then kind of digging into just having a fun firehouse hockey team that, you know what, maybe we try and outscore our problems like the Oilers for a little bit here. It is what it is. It's the end. It is the end of the careers of Crosby, Malkin, and Letang. We're getting there. Um, and you are just trying to throw everything you can at one more championship run. If it involves losing a couple of prospects, losing a couple of picks, and make that sacrifice, but
Mhm.
maybe you spread those first rounders out. Maybe you go 24-26 if you can and maintain one of them somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, then also just putting a lot of praise into into your second round picks like we've been doing for so many years now. Uh, and for what it's worth, Kyle Dubas seems to be very good with the draft and his crew at least. Uh, we'll see how these prospects we have right now pan out in the next year. It's an interesting time, and when it comes to the picks, I mean, maybe you hold on, maybe you make it a first and a second, but next season, I don't know because we don't have a third this upcoming draft.
Mhm.
It's gonna be goofy season for the Penguins soon.
Yeah, there's a lot of I just don't think 2 firsts get involved. Like, if
Yeah,
I'm the Penguins, I'm
that
like,
is steep.
I'm like, you don't get 2 firsts plus our first round pick from last year. Like, you don't get that. You can get a second. You could get 2 fourth round picks. You can get 3 fourth round picks. I don't give a crap. You're not getting those high assets for Erik Karlsson at the age of 33.
Yeah.
It's not all encompassing. And I know that they would be doing a favor with Petrie and Granlund, but at the end of the day, those are still NHL caliber players, just overpaid going to a team that doesn't expect to do anything for the next couple of seasons. But thank you again to Gunnar for the question. Let's go over to Eli Welsh. Second time he has submitted a listener question. He has a good one here saying, do you think there's a bias against great defensemen and goalies that don't win the Stanley Cup? He referenced Jerome McGinley, Marcel Dion. Everybody talks about them. Great players that don't win the Stanley Cup. Says the only exception in his mind, or that he can think of, is Henrik Lundqvist. Obviously, everybody's mentioned that. He also asks, do defensemen and goalies need a Stanley Cup to be considered great in the history of the NHL? Horwat, what do you think about that?
You know what? It sure seems like it. Especially when you look at goalies. I mean, you look at the list of the NHL leaders, all-time leaders in wins by a goalie. I mean, Martin Brodeur, you'd look at as great. Patrick Wall, you look at as great. Fleury, Luongo, Belfour. Luongo's up there. He kind of gets the exception as well for not having a ring, but still being one of the greatest. I mean, he's number 4 all-time in wins. But you quickly get to a name that, when I say the name Curtis Joseph, what do you think of? Where would you stack him up?
I mean, I wouldn't say he's one of the greatest goaltenders of all time, but
he's 7th all-time in wins.
Yeah. I mean, you just mentioned 3 of the top 7 goaltenders of all time don't have, in wins, don't have a Stanley Cup on their resume.
Yeah. And I mean, like we said, Luongo gets that pass, I think, just because of longevity and also charisma. He was kind of one of those players that everyone knew who he was, really. On top of being a phenomenal player, he was the leader of the Vancouver Canucks team for a long time, on top of his other excursions. Henrik Lundqvist gets the pass, longtime New York Rangers goalie. Was in a cup final. Was an overtime goal away from having it swing in his direction. But Curtis Joseph falls in at 7 with 454 career wins. That is more than Terry Sawchuk. But we don't ever discuss Curtis Joseph as one of the greatest. I mean, within top 10 of wins is speaking for itself, especially considering some of the names he's ahead of. Dominic Hasek is only 15, and yet we look at him as possibly the greatest of all time.
Yeah. Here's another name, one that, for the younger audience might be an easier conversation to have. Ryan Miller's top 15 all time. Do you consider Ryan Miller Hall of Fame worthy?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. But that's the other thing, too. The Hall of Fame looks at goalies very weird. But it's hard. The defenseman part is also hard, I think.
The defensemen, I think, get disrespected more than the goaltenders. That's what I'll say. I'll say it is harder for a defenseman without a Stanley Cup than it is for a goaltender, because goaltenders can steal games. Goaltenders can go on runs. Goaltenders, I mean, you look at Henrik Lundqvist. Everybody likes to watch the guy in the big pads. And if they're great, Henrik Lundqvist, Roberto Luongo, Curtis Joseph, Ryan Miller, your name gets remembered. How many people remember the name Phil Housley? Right?
That's a good point.
How many people know that he is one of the best defensemen in the history of hockey? Right? He's a great American-born defenseman. A lot of people that are listening to this just said, who? Borje Salming. How many people know Borje Salming's name? He didn't win a Stanley Cup. How about this? Erik Karlsson. 3-time Norris Trophy winner. Hasn't won a Stanley Cup. When it's all said and done, are people going to look at him as one of the best defensemen to ever play the game?
Maybe know what? Not. Probably not.
Clearly not top 5. Yet there's a lot of really good defensemen. Bobby Orr, Ray Bourque, Nick Lidstrom. Understandably not top 5. But when you start talking about the list of greatest defensemen of all time, how long do you go before you bring up Erik Karlsson? Before you bring up Phil Housley? Before you bring up Borje Salming?
It's quite a while. It's quite a while.
So, yeah, I agree. Like, even Any of those names, would you have thought of them before Scott Niedermayer?
I forgot about Scott Niedermayer, honestly, because there are just so many great ones as well. No, but I'm sure Niedermayer's name would have come up before an Erik Karlsson. It's plus the NHL and hockey, at least, it's a sport of it's still trying to figure out a way to put its feet in the ground, right? It's still trying to really grow in terms of a national audience.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do to grow the game? Well, you look at your forwards. You look at the guys that score the goals and make the saves. So yeah, the defensemen are going to get disrespected because they're not. Look at this fancy goal that he just scored. That's why Bobby Orr took over so much. He was an offensive-minded defenseman.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Erik Karlsson's season became so
publicized,
revered and looked at. Yeah, he was a defenseman, but he was scoring. Well, that's what you got to do. You have to score goals to win games. Yeah, you need defense to win as well, but that goes unnoticed.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably a huge reason why goaltenders and defensemen get pushed to the wayside, because it's all about the forwards, the centers, the wingers that are putting up the numbers, putting up the offensive numbers, the offensive metrics, and showing that this game can be fun to watch. You can't really have a defenseman go out there and do some fancy dancy stuff and draw the eyes. Why do you think every time a goalie goal happens, it's like headline news? It is because it's rare and it is offense.
Yeah.
Also, it is him scoring. It's interesting. Plus, how about a goalie that has won a cup and still gets disrespected? Chris Osgood.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some interesting names, and especially for goalies. How about also Curtis Joseph? I just glanced at his stat line. Never even won a Vezina.
Nope.
He doesn't have an award to his name. He's a King Clancy to his name. That's it. Everywhere else, just nothing.
Yeah.
So a lot of interesting stuff. But yeah, if you're not a forward, you're not the one drawing the eyes of the fans, you're not going to get the respect you deserve. And maybe that's why guys like Luongo and Lundqvist get that praise, because they were charismatic as hell. They drew the eyes of the fans, and also, at least in Lundqvist's case, played in one of the biggest markets in the world.
Yeah.
Luongo played on the island for a little bit, I guess.
I mean, I guess you could also look at present day NHL and look at the youngest defenseman in the league. Who gets the headlines? Cale Makar, offensive defenseman that can also play defense. Like I don't want to crap on any of these guys' defensive acumen, but they're known more because of their offensive abilities. Quinn Hughes, Adam Fox, Miro Heiskanen, and then you get into and Rasmus Dahlin. And Owen Power. And this. And it's always flashy bright lights. That's what people are attracted to. But hey, listen, at the end of the day, Eli hit it right on the head. When you talk about greatest players to never win a Stanley Cup, whenever he submitted this question, which was last week, I was looking and I was like, let's just look up a couple articles and see how many defensemen they include. Maybe one. Like Henrik Lundqvist is included in all of them. Maybe Luongo gets on there every once in a while. Certainly not any defenseman. Like Phil Housley, I think, was on one, and I searched through like 20. Yeah. And there's no other defenseman. It was Paul Correa, it was Jerome McGinley. It was a very good point. Marcel Dion included in that. So very good point by Eli. Very good discussion. Obviously, a great discussion to have in July. We love all these listener questions. Honestly, the listener questions have been great since we started doing them a couple weeks back. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have 2 more to get to before the end of this one. A little bit longer, but we hope you enjoy. We'll be back here on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by Inside the Penguins, a proud partner of the Hockey News. This next question, as we continue our long list of catching up with listener questions here, as I punch my laptop, Trevor Cox on Twitter. Horwat, Trevor actually joined Twitter for the express purpose of submitting a question to the podcast. He has he is following 3 people on Twitter right now. The Pittsburgh Penguins, the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, and friend of the show, Hunter Hodes.
He chose some good follows.
He is off to a great start. So thank you to Trevor for going on Twitter. That is a brave thing to do. I'm sure you will soon find out that Twitter can be a hellscape. But
how about joining Twitter in the time of threads, by the way?
I deactivated my threads.
That was fast.
I was like, I am over this already. Like, I'm like, I'm over it. So I deactivated my threads and I'm back on Twitter, just as Trevor is on Twitter as well. He says, how much of a possibility do you think there is that Granlund ends up getting bought out during the second buyout window? It's a good question.
It is. And we know that Dubas said he likes to look at buyouts as a last resort option.
Yep.
And with the Karlsson deal hanging in the balance, and like I had mentioned before, Drew O'Connor's arbitration hearing being the last day, doesn't do the Penguins any favors.
No.
Because let's say Karlsson gets dealt to Carolina next week. And let's say we were waiting for the arbitration hearing. We're just SOL. There's nothing we can do about that. We have to figure out what to do then. I think in that case, you probably just pull the trigger and buy him out. But if you can make Granlund part of the Karlsson deal, I don't know. It's hard. I think the fact that we're waiting a lot for possibly the Karlsson trade to happen and probably waiting until the hearing's August 4th. Let's say the deal gets done August 5th. Oh, well, we'd have to buy Granlund out in the next 72 hours after that. Buy him out the 5th. Deal's done the 6th. Well, I mean, you just created a great news week for everybody. But I bet he does, just because I don't know. I want to say he does, just because it makes things so much easier on a lot of different people. And I just don't see Granlund being part of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Man, that's a thinker.
It really, especially because, I really don't think the Karlsson deal should last until August 4th.
No, it shouldn't. That's also part of it. It really shouldn't.
But I mean, I also didn't think we'd get to July 18th with it. So I'm not sure what he would do. And I mean, Trevor also mentioned that, yeah, I know that, Dubas said he doesn't like utilizing the buyout because you don't like seeing that cap space over and over and over again every single year for a player that's not on your team. And they already have that in Jack Johnson for the next, I think, 3, including this season, 3 more seasons or 2 more seasons, something like that. But the cap flexibility that buying him out would provide is just so valuable. I understand you don't want to see it. I understand it's going to hurt in a couple years, but sometimes you just have to bite the bullet. And if the Pittsburgh Penguins don't pull through with the Erik Karlsson deal, or even if they do, say they go through with the Erik Karlsson deal, they make the trade work somehow, but Granlund's not part of it. He's still on the roster at $5 million. You have Karlsson, but you're still right around the salary cap ceiling. I still probably would prefer the buyout because then you have Karlsson and then you can create $4 million in cap space. You don't have to use it this offseason. Go into the season with $4 million in cap space. And yes, I keep coming back to this, and I know, Horwat, you're going to tell me the same thing you tell me every time. I'll believe it when I see it, but the salary cap's supposed to jump.
It is.
Right? And yes, it hasn't the past couple of years, but at this point, the NHL's out of dealing with the COVID losses, right? They're pretty much right back on track. And now it's time for expansion. Now it's time for growth. I see the salary cap going up, and the way that you would be able to this season and next create cap space for a team that is going to be bad in 4 or 5 years anyway, like you mentioned, just do it. Like, that's what I would do. Now is the question is, how much of a possibility is it that Kyle Dubas does it? I would, again, if I'm putting percentages on it, I would say 70% he doesn't, 30% he does.
Yeah, I think buying out Mikael Granlund's probably the proper answer. Also, how far over the cap can you go in the offseason again?
10%,
So that's like 8 million.
like
Ugh,
$8 million.
dang. So that doesn't really help. That doesn't give the Penguins all that many favors considering they're already a little over 2 over.
Yeah, but they also have 3 goalies at the NHL level. Janssen would probably be sent down or placed on, one of their forwards would be placed on waivers. So and
Mhm.
they could get cap compliant pretty
Yeah,
quickly,
I'm
I
just
feel
trying
like.
to think of the gymnastics that Kyle Dubas kind of has to do here for making a Karlsson deal fit while possibly still having, like, if you were to do a Karlsson deal now and still buy out Granlund at the later dates, what kind of gymnastics need to be done? Like, that's part of why I'm thinking maybe we need to buy him out first just to have that extra 4 million in space
Mm.
to make this cap thing work for the offseason, because you can only go so far over. There's a lot of numbers being crunched in my head. So I think the right move is to buy him out if you can't get him part of the deal at least.
Yeah.
Because the savings are just so enticing. Um, it's just hard to do the math and figure out what San Jose is going to retain, what maybe a third team has to step in and take, but also not going over that $8 million limit during the offseason. And even if you go near that, well, suddenly you got to drop 7 somewhere too, right? And then all of a sudden you have to drop more money in other places to get cap compliant by puck drop.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I get why this trade's going to take a while, but if our offer is at the ready, I mean, we're in week 3 of Karlsson watch, so we'll see how things play out. But I think when it comes to the Granlund buyout, it helps immensely. So I would say, unless he's part of the deal, you have to take up on that.
I mean, the only way that I can see the Penguins being able to make the Karlsson deal without Granlund, then buy Granlund out, they probably don't get that money is bonus. It's probably Petrie, Ruda, that's about 8 million, 8.5 million. Probably POJ, that's another million there. That's 9 million, and then 3 million retention, and you're flat out at 2 million. You buy out Granlund, you're 2 million under the cap.
Boom. There's the math. That's the math I was trying to do in my head.
But again, then it's then you're out 3 of your current top 6, whatever way you split it, 3 of 6 NHL defensemen right now. You add Karlsson, but then you have Smith and Ruhwedel as your third pairing. I mean, gets interesting.
Who else is down there? Who else is down there?
You were like,
you're right, Ruhwedel.
Friedman.
Hey, we wanted to see a lot more Friedman last season.
Friedman, Will Butcher.
Will Butcher's
maybe
down there. Which side is he, though? Can I get a handedness on Will Butcher? Shoots left.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Ty Smith can also play the right side, so
love to see it.
So I don't know. Again, silly season in the NHL right now. This is what we talk about: random trades, and this has been the Erik Karlsson episode that we haven't done. We've put off for as long as we could for some reason. But we do have one more question. Let's get to this one because it does also deal with the Granlund buyout. Thatcher on Twitter asks, I want to see the Penguins get rid of Granlund for next season, but what would that mean for the second power play unit? I don't want to see Carter or Eller out there, but I'm not sure the Pens have other options for somebody to take faceoffs.
Yeah, funny that we were discussing this earlier because that did become part of the discussion in my head of, well, who's playing center down on that second unit? Like, yeah, you may have Letang and or Karlsson. No, sorry, Letang or Karlsson there. Who's playing center? Well, you might not have a choice but to say, hey, Brian Rust, remember whenever you used to play center like 15 years ago?
Yeah.
Because Lars Eller's an option. I know I hated it when they did it during overtime, but you might not have another option other than, all right, Jeff Carter, go take the face off and skate directly off the ice. We're playing 3 wingers. You're rolling with that. I don't know. I mean, like I said, it's goofy season. That's an option. If he is that good at faceoffs, that is an option. That is a strategic option. But man, is that ugly. I don't think I hate Lars Eller there, though. If he can prove to be a net front presence, maybe.
I don't know if he'd quite be that. I don't hate Lars Eller there to begin with,
Yeah.
mainly because, and this is a question I'll ask you too, how concerned are you with power play 2 in general?
So yeah, that's the other part of it is how concerned are we exactly? We mentioned
Especially
before they maybe get
especially if the
45 seconds.
Yeah, especially if the Penguins get Karlsson on that top unit, and even like Letang gets down to the second unit, or even if they just add Karlsson, then you have Raquel and Rust on the second unit to begin with.
Yeah.
Probably POJ. I'm not really concerned with who's playing center at that point on the second power play because they're going to get less than 45 seconds, right?
Mhm.
They're going to get maybe 30 seconds because listen, the power play is not going well. We need to recharge the top six for once we get back to 5-on-5. Like, go out there for 26 seconds, whatever. And at that point, you
Yeah.
could probably just put out your third or fourth line.
Yeah, and most of the time they're coming in and off the fly anyway, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's not like it's a whistle, you got to switch and take a face off. I mean, sometimes it happens. Yeah, that's why I'm thinking maybe just we'd have Brian Rust do it, just send him in there, uh, but then go full bore and try to get the puck back if you lose. Um, I think because it's on the fly, I think you could get away with three wingers. I really do, especially because it's the second unit. You're not putting that much emphasis on it. I mean, you're putting something there, but Brian Rust has the history of it. He has the ability to do it, especially as on a second line basis. And you go with the forwards of Rust, Riley Smith, and Ricard Raquel, maybe. I mean, we're not bad. It's not a bad situation there.
It's not. But here's the last thing I'll say as well. I mean, no, don't care about second power play. But also, what's everybody have against Lars Eller specifically in an
Yeah,
offensive role? The guy has scored 10 goals at least every season since 2013-14, except 2020-21 when he played 44 games and scored 8. As a second power play center, surrounded by, like you mentioned, Rust, Raquel, whoever's on defense, whether that's POJ, Letang if he's bumped down for Karlsson, Ty Smith potentially. That's a decent second power play, and at the end of the day, isn't that all you need, right? So
yeah,
I don't get the hate for Eller. I certainly do not put him in a class with Jeff Carter. Um,
correct.
but I'm again, and we both said this, not all that concerned about the second power play unit. Second penalty kill, yes. Second power play, not very much.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So I think anyone can sit there. You know, if you need to take a draw, then maybe you do have to just throw Carter out, send him right off. You know, it's firehouse hockey, ladies and gentlemen.
And I know we're running very over here, but once he resigns, Drew O'Connor
There you go.
played third line center for Team USA at the World Championships. Did a pretty good job of it too. Wouldn't hate it.
Yeah. No,
Give him a shot. He's young. He's hungry. Give him a shot.
Firehouse hockey, ladies and gentlemen. It's goofy season. We're here discussing all of the things.
All of the things. I hope everybody enjoyed that 7-6 game against the Florida Panthers, because that might be the rule and not the exception next season.
And you know what? And you know what? Everyone did enjoy that game.
They did. That was Chris Letang's return game. 2 goals, 2 assists, including the OT winner. That was great. That was a fun game. It was a frustrating game because it wasn't even that there was no defense. There was no goaltending being played. It was Alex Lyon before he got good.
Yeah.
And it was Dustin Tokarski / Casey DeSmith. Was that who was in net for the Penguins?
I think so, yeah. And what was one of the more fun games the season before? That was like January 2nd against, I think, the Sharks, whenever it was Penguins up 5-0 after the first, and it was like 5-5 after the second or something stupid like that.
Was that this season?
I said the season before.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say my perception of time is out the window if that was this season. But no, okay. Sorry, I did not hear you say that.
All good, but I mean, people loved that game because it was just entertaining as all hell. It was firehouse hockey. I think I have to find it now.
Everybody loved it except for Mike Sullivan.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Because didn't Evan Rodriguez score a hat trick in that game?
That's right. It was the Rodriguez hat trick game because it was like the first period and he had all 3 of them.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Um,
So, it all comes back to the San Jose Sharks and Erik Karlsson. That's what this episode was in its entirety. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We will be back later this week with a new episode, maybe some news to talk about, likely not any news to talk about, but we will see you then regardless. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. See you next time.